As a traveling minister, it's been my privilege to work with more than 20 different denominations and a number of independent religious groups. In my vocation, I've met some fine people. Then I've met some that were not so fine. I've met bootleggers, gamblers, drunkards, thieves, robbers, and desperate criminals. But the most distasteful people that I ever met were these evil-minded, trouble-making gossip reporters. Do you know who they are? They're the ones who tell all the bad things they know about people and half the things they don't know. They'd rather walk a mile to tell a lie than to stand still and tell the truth. They don't necessarily start the lie, but they rejoice in giving it a ride. Speaking of lies, they say a lie travels mighty fast. It will go about 2 miles down the road before truth ever gets its boots on. Do you know why a lie travels so fast? It has so many friends. Some people ought to put a sign over their ears. No dumping here. Someone said, I never listen to this gossip. I just let it go in at one ear and out at the other. Well, if you do better than most people, because most people let it go in at both ears and out at the mouth. Brother Bob became a victim of this gossip, and here's how it all happened. Sister Suspicion went over to see Mrs. Critic the other day, and she said, Brother Bob has really been flirting with the women here lately, and it wouldn't surprise me if he's not been stepping out on his wife. As soon as their vain conversation was over, Mrs. Critic rushed over to see Sister Exaggerator. And during the course of their gossip, Mrs. Critic said, By the way, did you know that some people think that Brother Bob's been stepping out on his wife? You don't mean to say, replied Sister Exaggerator. That's what they tell me, said Mrs. Critic. Now, by the time Sister Exaggerator put the finishing touch on this scandal, Brother Bob had been stepping out on his wife. And Bob soon discovered that he had been doing things that he didn't do. In case a lie should ever get started on you, don't ever try to stop it. Just let it go. It'll hang itself. Uncle Bud said he had seen cows licking their tongues through the crack of the fence, but he had seen some people that could beat that. He said they could lick their neighbor across the other end of town. Now, if any man among you seem to be religious, of course that includes the women too, and bridleth not his tongue, but deceiveth his own heart, this man's religion is vain. There's a difference between the women and the men talking. You can eavesdrop a half a dozen men, and one man will usually lead the conversation. You eavesdrop a half a dozen women, and you don't know who's leading the conversation. Perhaps both men and women talk too much. It usually ends with this gossip. Should you ever get tangled up with this gossip and start pointing your finger at the faults of others, you just remember 3 fingers are pointing back at you. And remember, too, it's better to speak a good word about a bad man than it is to speak a bad word about a good man. This gossip always carries the weight of criticism. They tell me that life is funny. Man comes into this world without his consent. He leaves it against his will. During his stay on the earth, his time is spent in one round of contraries and misunderstandings. If he raises a family, he's a chump. If he doesn't, he's too selfish. If he raises a check, he's a crook. If he's rich, he's smart but dishonest. If he's poor, he's a bad manager and has no sense. If he's in politics, he's a grafter. If he's not, he's an undesirable citizen. If he goes to church, he's an old hypocrite. If he doesn't, he's an old sinner. If he gives for charity, it's for show. If he doesn't, he's an old tightwad. When he first comes into the world, everyone wants to kiss him. But before he leaves the world, everyone wants to kick him. If he dies young, there was a great future before him. If he lives to be a ripe old age, he's in the way. This would be a wonderful world and a much better place to live if it were not for this gossip.